Good morning. It's so nice to be with all of you this morning. I want to share with you first this reading by Robin Wall Kimmerer. It was entitled The Service Berry, and it showed up in Emergence magazine. Here's what she wrote. My son-in-law teaches high school economics, and the first principle his students learn is that economics is about decision making in the face of scarcity. Anything and everything in a market is implicitly defined as scarce. With scarcity as the main principle, the mindset that follows is based on a commodification of goods and services. The problem of managing decisions about abundance reminds me of a report that linguist Daniel Everett wrote as he was learning from a hunter-gatherer community in the Brazilian rainforest. A hunter had brought home a sizable kill, far too much for his family to eat, and the researcher asked how he would store the excess. Smoking and drying technologies were well known. Storing was possible. The hunter was puzzled, though, by the question, store the meat? Why would he do that? Instead, he sent out an invitation to a feast, and soon the neighboring families were gathered around the fire till every last morsel was consumed. This seemed like maladaptive behavior to the anthropologist, who asked again, given the uncertainty of meat in the forest, why didn't he store the meat for himself? Which is what the economic system of his home culture would predict. Store my meat? I store my meat in the belly of my brother, replied the hunter. I feel a great debt to this hunter for his words. In them beats the heart of gift economies, an antecedent alternative to market economies, another way of organizing ourselves to sustain life. In a gift economy, wealth is understood as having enough to share, and the practice of dealing with abundance is to give it away. In fact, status is determined not by how much one accumulates, but by how much one gives away. The currency in a gift economy is a relationship, actually, which is expressed as gratitude, as interdependence, and the ongoing cycles of reciprocity. A gift economy nurtures the community bonds that enhance mutual well-being. The economic unit is we rather than I, because I doesn't have any mutual flourishing in it. Here ends this morning's reading. So my husband and I have good friends, Matthew and Petra, who are organic farmers. So they have owned, managed, run a successful organic heirloom regional seed company in the Northeast, and actually a farm right south of Rochester, New York, where we have a horse farm ourselves. Now, by all accounts, they have been the darlings of the small seed world, profitable, good to their employees, skillful with social media, and generous with recipes and classes for gardeners on when and how to sow, maintain, propagate, harvest the myriads of vegetables and fruit they grow and the seeds that they offer. So about a year ago, though, they asked my husband if he would be their spiritual director as they were thinking about bailing on the market economy. They were contemplating actually like selling their seed company and becoming a part of the gift economy. And they needed someone to guide them through their discernment process. And Scott was honored to be just that person. Now, at first, I didn't really understand this concept of the gift economy that well, because the gift economy, by the way, is not to be confused with the barter economy, which is also cropping up. But the barter economy basically is an exchange of a product or a service for another product or service. It's a one-on-one exchange, which is still transactional, right? Just without currency. But what our friends wanted to be a part of is the gift economy. So as the year went on, I wasn't privy to their conversations, but I got to be in conversations with my husband and asked many questions. For instance, I asked him something like this, like, I'm confused actually. They are thinking of bailing on this water that we all swim in, the market economy, and rely on gifts. And he'd say, yeah. And I'd say, okay, well, I get this as gifts given and received. And he'd say, yeah, when they need something, they share it with their extended community. And then I'd say something like, well, aren't people going to feel like they are being used, that they are being taken advantage of when Petra and Matthew throw out a need, right? Or ask for a need. For instance, maybe their tractor breaks down and they need to use the neighbors in order to get their crop in. Well, he said, I'm just learning actually about this myself, and we should read up on it some more. But it's been explained to me like this. The gift economy is not as foreign as it seems. In fact, most of us actually participated in it already. We just call it family. If your children need something, you let them borrow it or you give it to them. There is no transactional kind of exchange going on. And we don't resent our children for asking for generosity, our gifts, because we are family. It's what we do, right? All Matthew and Petra are doing is to take that circle of a family like this, okay? And they're just working on spreading it out one more ring farther out. They'll keep enough for themselves, and then they'll give away the rest to produce seeds and produce rather than sell it. So my husband Scott also said to me, I didn't know this, but I guess gift economies preceded the market economy, mostly by indigenous communities. And then he passed on this writing by Robin Wall Kimmerer, who I did the reading this morning with, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass. Now, I want you to listen to how she articulates this gift economy a little better, okay? Here's what she says. Pure, beautiful water is a gift from the skies. It was previously unthinkable that one would pay for water, but as careless economic expansion pollutes fresh water, we now incentivize privatization of springs and aquifers. Sweetwater, a free gift from the earth, is pirated by faceless corporations who encase it in plastic shells to sell. And now many can't afford what was previously free, and we incentivize wrecking public waters to create demand for the privatized. In contrast, in indigenous societies all over the world where remnants of gift economies endure, water is sacred. And people have a moral responsibility to care for it, to keep it flowing as the lifeblood kind of Mother Earth. It is a gift to be shared by all. And the notion of owning water is an ecological and ethical travesty. Now, after a year of meeting with the two of them and learning from others who have left the market economy, Matthew and Petra, they started processing how to let their business go, how to best tell their employees and their customers and their friends and the academic research group that they work with, what they wanted to do. And in June of this past year, they had a 2.5 hour ritual of sorts in the Bristol Hills of New York, where their farm is. And there were at least like 150 people that showed up for this thing. It was a ritual of grief and goodbye to their company, a ritual of explaining what they were doing and why they were doing it, and a time for those attending to commit to being part of Matthew and Petra's community, or as you might put it, their inner dependent web. It was a beautiful ritual of new beginnings. And here's what actually surprised me about it. So I went to this ritual thinking they were going to lead with this deep sense of like judging capitalism, kind of taking it apart, like a Marxist critique of sorts, or that they might name a desire to be better or less tainted human beings, extricating themselves from the competitive and cutthroat nature of running a business, or even just not wanting to be a part of an exploitative system as it can compromise your ethics for a bottom line. Here's the thing, though. That's not what they talked about. There wasn't even a hint of judgmentalism or striving for purity. Instead, they talked about their brokenheartedness. Yeah, their brokenheartedness. See, Matthew and Petru weren't passionate about creating an organic seed business. They got into the seed business because they both had a relationship with the natural world and with seeds, in which that natural world and seeds were alive to them. And yet, as they wanted to share those beans, the seeds, with the world and the gifts of the seeds with the world, after a while, actually, they slowly realized that the market mentality not just turned seeds into a commodity, but it silenced the seeds for them as well. Now, I'm telling you, it is still hard for me to wrap my head sometimes around this enormous thing our friends have done. But it set my husband and I on many conversations about how Matthew and Petra's new life journey is shining revealing light, actually, on how the two of us are traveling through the world ourselves. And while we are still in process about all of that, it has clearly impacted us in a number of ways. Here's how. First, it's invited us to a deeper awareness. Petra and Matthew are making us aware of and come to terms with the many ways we unknowingly self-identify as consumers first. Kimmerer gets at this beautifully. She points out that human beings once centrally identified ourselves and understood ourselves as an ecosystem of citizens, not of consumers. Or to put it another way, we have all, without really noticing or acknowledging it, have drifted from being citizens building interdependence to consumers pursuing self-sufficiency and security. Kimmerer gets at this in her article about service berries. So service berries are this like type of fruit that is really, it's not commercially marketed, right? Yet has many uses both for people and for animals. So she writes this about the service berry. I think that service berries show us another model, one based on reciprocity rather than accumulation, where wealth and security come from the quality of your relationships, not from the illusion of self-sufficiency. The gift relationships with birds and bees, in other words, bees that pollinate the fruit on the service berry, and birds that eat the fruit and then poop out the seeds all over the place, service berries would actually disappear from the planet, even if they hoarded abundance, preaching atop the like wealth ladder. They would not save themselves from the fate of extinction if their partners did not share in the abundance, the birds and the bees. Hoarding won't save us either. All flourishing is mutual. So it has been striking for Scott and I to notice how our brains keep words and ideas like that at a distance. It has been a really amazing journey just to watch what happens to yourself when you kind of partner with friends who are doing something this radical, right? It's hard to describe, actually, but there is, in this way in which we keep talk of hoarding in the realm of ideas rather than the realm of emotions. It's as if all of our like psychological faculties marshaled themselves to ensure we stay thinking about how modern American human beings hoard rather than allowing ourselves to feel the truth that we, as two individuals, have allowed ourselves to become hoarders, and how we've allowed ourselves to not feel icky about that by buying into our culture's primary frame and concept of self-sufficiency. It's such a comfortable word, isn't it? I mean, especially when you compare it to Kimmer's chosen word of hoarding. And here, maybe what I'm wrestling with most. By seeing myself as simply pursuing self-sufficiency rather than problematically embracing hoarding, I'm also cutting myself off from the awareness of the personal cost of market economies. And here's where Scott and my heavy conversations about awareness took on still serious but a lighter tone. Okay. We were talking about this a couple months ago, and my husband blurted out this line that he had me rolling in laughter about, but he said, "You know what? Self-sufficiency is just a fancy word for the lipstick on a pig called loneliness." I'm going to say it again. Self-sufficiency is just a fancy word for the lipstick on a pig called loneliness. So true. Self-sufficiency in the end leads to loneliness and isolation and separation. And that right there, friends, well, just like Matthew and Petra, how can it not break our hearts? The second thing that Matthew and Petra's journey has brought into our conversations as a couple an awareness of is our love for the Jewish theologian Martin Buber. So Martin Buber claims that we have two ways of engaging others in the world. Buber contends that in the modern day society, our relationship with others, and they are most often based on what is the I, it mentality. This is a mentality that turns those we relate to as us instead of relating to one person. You become an it in numerous unrecognizable but important ways. So Buber basically believes we are being tricked into bringing our exploitative frame to our relationships. This I it mode means we often use our relationships with others. We are, of course, relating to the one in front of us, but we relate to them more as a tool rather than as a person. We don't engage people by paying attention to their own needs or their story, but instead, if we're really honest and we think about this, most often, what is their utility to us? Which based obviously entirely on our needs. But Peter said here's another way, okay? If we can awaken and become conscious of the cultural trick being played on us, we can meet one another as thou and it can, he says, counter our modern society's view of relationships with a spiritual and sacred view of relationships instead, and move from I, it mentality to I, thou mentality. Which, to use a spiritual practice important to us in our Soul Matters groups that we lead here, we can more often engage others from a practice of deep listening, of being aware of and centering their needs, not ours, of connecting in this place where we aren't transactional with the other person, where we aren't trying to get something out of them for our use, but are trying to have an experience with them. And it is, as Buber argues, that it's in this I thou exchange that the holy shows up, actually, or as I like to say it, where the magic happens. We are better at this as kids, as friends. We just are. As a child, we are in relationship to be in relationship, right? The amount of times I can actually recall sitting on a swing set with a friend swinging next to me just for like a good hour, just chatting about life with no cares or worries or competition or ulterior motives is astounding to me. But sadly, this rarely lasts long. And Buber is actually clear about his own brokenheartedness around this. And it doesn't just in fact like our human relationships, he says, it also infects our relationships with the entire world. He explains this with great theological complexity, but here's how actually my Midwest brain kind of understands this. Okay. Basically, how can I use things to get ahead, consumerist mindset, step in early? And we, starting at a young age, in this status obsessed, trying to fit in culture, we get caught up in it early. We go to lunch, okay? Let's like say with our favorite average old Joe generic thermos in elementary school, right? And not just our favorite, but the one that kind of felt like our buddy, right? It was alive in a way. We talked to it as we poured out our milk or our juice into the mug. We sang with it and we said thank you to it. You all remember this, right? Now, it may not have been a thermos for you, but I'm positive you probably all have some occasion of talking to some inanimate object as a child as if it were a friend. It may have been your bike, may have been your blanket, may have been a favorite stuffed animal. But I am pretty sure all of you had something. Of course, what happened to all of us? Well, one day, if we go back to the thermos idea, right? One day you showed up with your friend, your plain old regular thermos, and a bunch of other kids showed up with the new highly merchandised Spider-Man thermoses, and all of a sudden, you are evaluated and judged as a dork who is left out because you didn't have the current status marker. And that hurt, actually. But clearly, it was a game that everyone was playing. So, slowly but surely, you began to think about and relate to your lunchbox items. Actually, all of your items, your blankie, your bike, your favorite stuffed animal, not as a friend who you can talk to or who talk to you, but instead as things that were to be used in service of this pervasive and ever-present status-seeking game. And in no time at all, the speaking stopped. What was alive in your life was alive no more. They went from being thous to being its. And this sad story didn't stay contained to objects you surround yourself with, right? But also spilled over into a relationship with the natural world. For instance, when I was a kid, right, the natural world was alive for me. I talked to it all the time. There was a sugar maple that I climbed often in the neighbor's yard with a book tucked into my pants. And I would sit up there and read and talk to the tree for hours. Flowers in the garden, they were friends. Snapdragons I'd pop off and use as puppets by sticking my fingers into the end and talking to the flower and have them talk back to me. Honeysuckle, I'd hear say, taste my sweet nectar. Cicadas that directed me, butterflies that whispered, rain that sang to me, snow that held a quiet, whispering, comforting aspect of let's just be. The God they talked about in the congregational church that I grew up in elementary school, never spoke to me. But the divinity that lived in the shade of a solid oak sure could. How many of you have had a similar experience as a child where nature, the natural world, actually spoke to you? If I could be there right there with you now, I'm sure a few of you would have your hand up. But in short, what I'm trying to say is that as children, right, we are mystics because as a child, we are open to the world speaking to us and we feel, actually know, like know inside, that somehow it is also listening to what we have to say. And in the midst of that magical dance of listening and speaking, we have the feeling. You do remember it, right? The feeling of love, that feeling of being loved by and loving those remarkable thous that are everywhere that we looked. Which brings me full circle back to Petra and Matthew and their broken hearts and their desire actually to engage with the market, disengage from the market economy and move into the space in the world of the gift economy. Which, of course, wasn't just a move motivated by the desire to no longer exploit and use people and the seeds, but a deep and kind of like primary desire to enable the seeds to speak to them once again, for the seeds to be once again thou. And friends, still am unsure about how the gift economy can work, but here's what I'm not unsure about. I now too am brokenhearted. Because of Petra and Matthew, I now feel a brokenheartedness that was buried kind of like deep inside of me, but is buried no more. And for that, man, I can't tell you how grateful I am. It is a brokenheartedness that kindly and joyfully doesn't just have my husband and I talking, but is talking. And it's asking us some questions that are pertinent to all of us. How might you disengage? What small but important steps might you take to be more aware of how our market-driven, status-seeking culture is tricking you in a million tiny ways each day? How might you wipe off that sneaky lipstick called self-sufficiency and instead see how hoarding is making you feel more alone than you need to be? How might this living and speaking mystical world call you back home? And how might you join with others to shake off the sleep of the I-it relationality so you can return to the world of I-thou? So those are some of the questions the two of us are asking ourselves, and nothing, honestly, would make me happier than for them to leak into your lives as well. I want to end with one more voice and thought. So Adam Wilson is a guy who already moved into this gift economy world, and it enabled him to really dive in deep to some really interesting philosophical questions. But he asked kind of, how can I fully feel my broken heart so it can lead me to making the world alive again? And he wrote this fabulous blog piece where he talks about how the lovingly so-called old timers he is friends with used to say much obliged to him upon saying goodbye. He explains that that statement can, of course, mean thank you or you're welcome, but unlike the modern gesture of being polite, obligation implies, as he says, a never finishedness to the relational entanglement. When you pass money back and forth and say thank you and you're welcome, you wipe clean that set of relationships, right? The root word of obligation, it turns out, is the same as ligament, which is something that binds two disparate entities into a purposeful or useful articulation. Wilson comments, much obliged implies, I acknowledge that I will never be off the hook with you and wouldn't choose to, even if I could. I entrust you with my ongoing gratitude. That's the kind of language that grows neighborhoods and cultures rather than market economies. In other words, friends, there is a trusting in relationship, both large and small. Indeed, Matthew and Petra's new tagline on their seed packet is trusting abundance shared. So, my good peoples, who I know take this practice of being human seriously, I invite you to listen to your brokenheartedness and see actually where it takes you. And I, in gratitude for you being thoughtful thought partners with me, will say to you over and over again, much obliged, my friends, much obliged. May it be so. Amen.